Welcome to the Invader Historical Foundation YouTube channel. I'm Jonathan Claiborne. This video is the second part in our in-depth look at the Douglas Counter-Invader. In the first video, we went over the background and development of the Counter-Invader. If you missed that, you can check in the link below. The next few videos will go over different units that flew the plane, starting with the 1st Air Commando Wing and its squadrons. As a unit, the 1st Air Commando Wing traces its lineage back to 1923. On the 24th of March 1923, the U.S. Army Air Corps authorized the creation of the 16th Pursuit Group, which was to be based at Hurlburt Field in the Panama Canal Zone. Due to bureaucratic reasons, this unit was not formally activated until the 1st of December 1932, some 9 years later. By 1939, the Army had changed the name slightly, and they were known as the 16th Pursuit Group Interceptor. In 1942, the name changed again, and they were known as the 16th Fighter Group. As World War II began, and fighting was far away from Panama, the Army began shifting resources and pilots away from the group, sending them to the Caribbean and to South America. By mid-February 1942, the group had 19 Curtiss P-40Cs, of which 15 were operational, 8 P-40Es, of which 6 were operational, 9 Curtiss P-36As, of which 7 were operational, and a single North American BC-1. The real problem was that there were only 11 pilots, and only 7 of those had more than 1 year of experience flying pursuit planes. By the 1st of November 1943, the unit had been disbanded entirely. On the other side of the world, in the China-Burma-India theater, the British were struggling to make long-range penetrations into Burma. In August of 1943, President Roosevelt was at the Quebec Conference and heard an impassioned plans for success told by Brigadier Ord Wingate of the British Army. In Wingate's mind, much could be accomplished easily in Burma if the British had proper air support. President Roosevelt agreed and ordered the Army to make it happen. As a result, the 5,318th Provisional Air Unit was created to support the Chindits, the British long-range penetration groups. In March 1944, the 5,318th Air Unit was redesignated as the 1st Air Commando Group by General Hap Arnold and inherited the lineage of the 16th Pursuit Group. General Arnold chose 2 veteran P-40 pilots, Colonel John R. Allison and Colonel Philip Cochran, to co-command the unit. Allison had years of experience flying in the CBI theater and distinguished himself in the 75th Fighter Squadron. Cochran was renowned for his unconventional tactics in the North African campaign that brought great success. By September 1944, the 1st Air Commando Group had quite an array of vehicles and personnel assigned to them. Lieutenant Colonel Grattan M. Grant Mahoney led a squadron of 30 P-51A Mustangs. Lieutenant Colonel Robert T. Smith had a squadron of 12 B-25H Mitchell bombers. Major William T. Cherry Jr. led a squadron of 13 C-47 Skytrains. Captain William H. Taylor Jr. led a squadron of 225 Waco CG-4A military gliders. Major Andrew Robori and Lieutenant Colonel Clinton B. Gady led a squadron of 100 L-1 and L-5 Sentinel aircraft. Also of note, 6 Sikorsky R-4 helicopters were led by Lieutenant Colonel Gady, and in May 1944, they tested the first use of a helicopter in combat operations. During this period, there was a tragic accident where 2 of the CG-4 gliders collided in midair, killing American and British soldiers. The Americans were worried that the Brits would not trust them to fly them into combat operations anymore. The British commander, Lieutenant Colonel D.C. Herring, placated the Americans by telling them, "Please be assured that we will go with your boys, any place, anytime, anywhere." This became the unit's motto, anytime, any place. In April 1944, the P-51s were upgraded to the P-51B model, and in May, the B-25s were transferred out of the group and assigned to Bomber Command. Then in September, the unit traded the P-51B for the P-47D Thunderbolts. When the P-47s of the group attacked enemy shipping, bridges, railways, oil wells, and troop positions. They were the first American units to perform joint operation with the British Chindits, known as Operation Thursday, and they pioneered and perfected the glider landings that would become so important in Normandy's Operation Overlord. They made the first use of combat helicopters for medical evacuations. They were the first group to focus primarily on air-to-ground rocket tactics, and the first group to invade enemy territory solely by air, with transport planes dropping paratroopers instead of marching over land. They also participated in Operation Dracula at Rangoon. In January 1945, they traded the P-47s for P-51Ds. They led major assaults on Japanese air base at Don Mueang Airfield on the 15th of March 1945, and again on 9th of April 1945. These attacks destroyed well over 100 Japanese planes and cost the Americans only 3 fighter aircraft. In October 1945, the unit was pulled from the CBI theater and recalled to New Jersey, where it was deactivated in November. Almost 20 years later, the unit would be back. On the 14th of April 1961, the Air Force created the 4400th Combat Crew Training Squadron, or CCTS, at Hurlburt Field, Florida. The original strength of the squadron was 124 officers and 228 enlisted men. They had 16 C-47 Skytrains, 8 standard Douglas B-26 bombers, 8 T-28 Trojans. The official purpose of the squadron was to, quote, train indigenous air forces in counterinsurgency and conduct air operations, end quote. They quickly became known by their logistics codename, Jungle Jim. The situation in Southeast Asia began to deteriorate, and the U.S. wanted to send troops to stabilize the region, but were hesitant to get involved officially. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara wanted to test the efficiency of the counterinsurgency air operations. Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay pointed out that the 4400 CCTS was available for deployment. On the 11th of October 1961, President John F. Kennedy issued orders via the National Security Action Memorandum 104. Item 4 of this memo reads, subject to agreement with the government of Vietnam, which is now being sought, introduce the Air Force Jungle Jim Squadron into Vietnam for the initial purpose of training Vietnamese forces. Officially, the mission was training only, but covertly, the 4400th was combat operational. The planes were painted in the South Vietnamese Air Force insignias. The Air Force American crews wore OD green Australian-style uniforms that were devoid of any U.S. markings, name tapes, or other identifying marks. The pilots sanitized their wallets and removed their Geneva green cards. If they were captured over enemy territory, they would be disavowed. On the 20th of March 1962, the 4400th Combat Training Crew Squadron was elevated to group status and became the 4400th Combat Crew Training Group. In April 1962, the first Air Commando Wing was created as a replacement for the 4400th Combat Crew Training Group. The first Air Commando Wing would be responsible for all Air Commando training operations. The first Air Commando Wing would be headquartered at Hurlburt Field, Florida, but would oversee operations of Jungle Jim until their conclusion. This brings us to the 1st of June 1963, when the YB-26K prototype was delivered to Hurlburt Field for evaluation. For 4 months, the 1st Air Commando Wing put the prototype through its paces, running it hard and fast, testing the weapons, the handling, the duration, and simulated emergency procedures. As a result of the plane's good performance and the wing's thorough testing, in October 1963, the U.S. Air Force ordered 40 B-26Ks from Onmark Engineering Company. The B-26Ks were not retrofitted entirely in sequence. Although 642 is the third plane in the serial number block, she was the second plane completed by Onmark. The first plane, 640, went to Edwards Air Force Base for testing at the Air Force Test Center. The second plane, 642, was assigned to the 1st Air Commando Wing. It arrived on the 10th of July, 1964, and marks the first B-26K assigned to an operational unit. In August, the 1st Air Commando Wing received 5 more planes: 643, 644, 645, 646, and 647. September saw 2 additional planes assigned, 649 and 650. By the end of the year, on paper, the unit had 14 B-26Ks assigned to it. However, 3 of those planes were actually out of the country on Black Ops missions with the CIA. In January 1965, 2 additional planes would join the Black Ops mission. The CIA planes would be covered in the next video. Operationally, within the 1st Air Commando Wing, the B-26Ks were assigned to the 603rd Air Commando Squadron. While the 1st Air Commando Wing was the first unit to receive the new planes, it was also the first unit to experience the loss of one. On the 22nd of December 1964, Plane 656 was destroyed in a crash while practicing low-level bombing tactics at the Eglin Field Combat Range. It marks the shortest operational period of all the B-26Ks, having been destroyed a mere 42 days after it was rebuilt. In fact, this plane was lost before all of the B-26Ks were even finished. The plane, 656, took off during the morning of Wednesday, 16th of December, as part of a flight of 3 planes. It was flying in a bombing run exercise where it was equipped with live ammunition. The pilot, Captain Thomas Ray White, died in the crash, but the navigator, First Lieutenant Maurice W. Bourne, was able to parachute clear of the plane but suffered serious injuries and was hospitalized. Originally, I had not been able to find information on the crew of 656. Because the plane was not lost during wartime, these men did not show up on memorial websites. Thanks to a donor who sent a donation to our PayPal account, I was able to buy a premiumnewspapers.com subscription and found several different articles that mentioned this crash and the names of the crew. Dave Canton of the Commemorative Air Force sent me a link to a 2010 interview with Mr. Bourne himself. According to Mr. Bourne, the plane was flying over the bombing range 65 at Eglin and was practicing low-level napalm and bombing runs. They were having some electrical issues in their plane. As they came in for another pass, something didn't feel right to Mr. Bourne. He was about to flip the master arms switch off and abort the run, but he was not able to act in time. The plane was traveling at around 300 miles per hour and 30 or 40 feet above the ground. As the bombs fell out of the bomb bay, they essentially exploded under the plane, sending pieces of shrapnel all through the wing, cockpit, and fuselage. Mr. Bourne checked the bomb bay compartment and could see that they were on fire. Captain White began to climb so that they had enough time to bail out. Emergency procedures for low-level bombing operations established during the Korean War indicated that the pilot should climb to 400 feet before attempting to bail out. At about 400 feet above the ground, the fire reached the cockpit and exploded the 100-gallon bomb bay tank that sat in the back of the cockpit and engulfed the cockpit in flames. First Lieutenant Bourne and Captain White both reached up and pulled the emergency ejection handle that jettisoned their canopies so that they could bail out. They looked at each other, and Maurice grabbed the window and rolled to the right, falling out of the airplane, being swept over the wing and under the tail. At some point after bailing out, he was either hit with debris or snagged his leg on debris, but he lost his right leg at the knee. After he landed, he waited in the swamp for about an hour until a helicopter from Eglin found him and returned him to base. Captain White did not survive. According to Maurice, he believes that Captain White waited until after Maurice had cleared the plane before he attempted to bail out, and that this delay to ensure the safety of his navigator cost the pilot his life. This accident spurred some new safety regulations and changes to operations, and things went relatively quiet after that. The 603rd flew routine training exercises out of Florida until the spring of 1966. By the spring of 1966, at least 31 of the B-26Ks had been assigned to the 1st Air Commando Wing for some period of time. They were pulled out and sent on secret missions. Others were transferred to the 605th Air Commando Squadron down in Panama, and one was lost during a training accident. In May 1966, the designation of the counterinvader was changed from B-26K, a bomber, to A-26A, an attack plane. The pilots would soon learn the reason behind this change. The support personnel for Project Big Eagle departed England Air Force Base, Louisiana on 6 of June 1966 by way of two C-130s arriving at Nakhon Phanom Royal Thai Air Base, called NKP by the crews, on the 9th of December 1966. On the 11th of June 1966, 8 B-26Ks were pulled from the 603rd Air Commando Squadron. These planes would form Detachment 1, or better known as Project Big Eagle. They were equipped for long-range flying and outfitted with ferry tanks, dispatched immediately to Nakhon Phanom, where they would be attached, but not assigned, to the 606 Air Commando Squadron of the 56 Air Commando Wing. The first 8 planes at NKP were 643, 650, 665, 667, 668, 669, 672, and 676. The aircraft did not arrive on site until the 18th of June. There were reports that when the aircraft arrived in Hawaii, a number of the planes had problems that necessitated a several-day layover. Although the aircraft arrived on the 18th of June, it took several days to reconfigure them for combat operations. This detachment was the reason for the designation change. The Royal Thai government allowed the American planes to operate from Thailand to attack Laos and Vietnam, but they would not permit bombers to be operated out of their bases. In a bureaucratic sidestep, all 40 of the counter-invaders became attack planes to allow them to be deployed to Thailand. This detachment was intended to provide an evaluation of the combat performance of the B-26K in real combat situations. Shortly after arriving at NKP, around the 22nd or 23rd of June, the planes flew orientation flights with members of the 606 Air Commando Squadron to get used to the countryside and get familiar with the bird dog observation planes. Once the pilots had the lay of the land and operations understood, they immediately started flying combat operations, attacking targets relayed to them by the bird dogs. Less than a week after arriving in Vietnam, on the 25th of June 1966, the counter-invaders suffered their first combat loss. Plane 650 was shot down while on an attack run. The plane was taken down by enemy ground fire in the Steel Tiger area 10 miles north of Ban Phakat. Details of the crew service files indicate that the aircraft exploded and no parachutes were seen. All 3 members of the crew of this plane perished. The plane was piloted by Captain Charles Glendon Dudley. First Lieutenant Anthony Frank Cavalli served as the navigator, and Captain Thomas Herbert Wolfe served as the observer. The plane wasn't officially listed as lost until the 28th of June. On the night of the 24th of July, 1966, roughly a month after their first combat loss, Big Eagle suffered another loss due to an accident. This plane was crewed by Major George Glenn Duke and as the pilot, and Captain Miles Takeshi Tanamoto as the navigator. The plane was having some difficulty returning from a mission. It approached the airbase, and while final approach to the runway, crashed into the ground, killing both men aboard. The accident was not investigated very thoroughly. The report says, probably due to fuel starvation. However, in my opinion, this seems unlikely. I'll propose an alternate hypothesis here. During their time in Vietnam, mostly after this accident, during their time in Panama, and during their time with the CIA, it was discovered that the B-26K had a flaw. The prototype was built with the R2800 103W water-injected engines. These engines allowed sufficient airflow for cooling. In the production model, this engine was swapped out for the R2800 53W engines, which were somewhat bigger. However, the engine cowls that were on the plane were the original type used with the R2879s. In short, they did not allow for sufficient airflow to get adequately cooling for the bigger, hotter engine. Couple that with the hot, humid tropical climates during the peak of summer, and it seems possible that the engines may have overheated due to prolonged exposure and inadequate airflow. This problem was eventually fixed, but was unknown at the time of this accident. Personally, I find that a more palatable explanation than assuming that veteran combat pilots simply forgot how much fuel they had. This seems to be supported by eyewitness accounts. Randy Ryman, a crew member at NKP at the time of the accident, recalls seeing the flames from the fire at the end of the runway. Rescue efforts were hampered from the heat as flames cooking off live rounds of ammo still aboard the aircraft. Another pilot flying the same time reported that they had left at the same time as Major Duke and returned after Duke's crash and still had plenty of fuel on board. If Duke's plane was fuel-starved, as the report suggests, then it's doubtful the fire would have burned so long and so hot as to cook off live rounds of ammunition. In total, 4 more planes were sent to Vietnam during 1966 as part of Project Big Eagle. In August, 678 was sent as a replacement for the lost planes. Then in December, detachment was bolstered to 10 planes, with 2 more arriving on the 1st of December, 660 and 675, and then on the 31st of December, plane 664 arrived as well. In January 1967, all 10 planes of the Big Eagle Squadron were formally transferred to the 606th Air Commando Squadron. Meanwhile, back in the States, the 1st Air Commando Wing and the 603rd Air Commando Squadron continued training new invader pilots, incorporating lessons learned from the field and experimenting with new tactics. In 1968, they were renamed the Air Commando Units to Special Operations Units and became the 1st Special Operations Wing. In January 1966, they moved from Hurlburt Field, Florida to England Air Force Base, Louisiana. On the 1st of July 1969, they moved back to Hurlburt Field, Florida. The 1st Special Operations Wing still exists today and still based out of Hurlburt. But the equipment they use has changed over the years. The mission has not. They still train the country's elite combat pilots to be the frontline response and to go where they are needed, anytime, any place. That's it for this episode. The next episode will continue looking at units that flew the B-26K, this time focusing on the CIA's Black Ops missions with the Counter-Invader. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. If you appreciate our work, please continue supporting our efforts by making a small donation at our website, link in the description. Donations like yours help the Foundation purchase archival records, accident reports, and other material that are crucial for our research. Even a small donation helps. Thanks for watching. See you next time.